When we think about history, we usually picture words, right? Books, letters, big important speeches. But what if the real stories, the most powerful ones, weren't written down at all? Today, we're going to look at the materiality of memory, how the stuff people left behind actually tells the unspoken story of their lives. Okay, to get us started, I have a question for you. Seriously, think about it for a second. If there was a fire and you could only grab one single object from your home, what would it be? Is it a photo? Some piece of jewelry? Maybe a beat-up old book? That gut feeling you just had, that instant emotional pull towards a specific thing, that is exactly what we're talking about today. That feeling is proof that objects are so much more than just, well, objects. They're little containers for our memories, our identities, and our stories. So yeah, we're diving into this idea of memory you can touch. This isn't about throwing out traditional history books. Not at all. It's about adding this really rich, tangible layer to it. It's about understanding the past not just through what people said, but through the world they actually built and lived in and touched. So, what's the big shift here? Well, a traditional biography, it's all about the texts, right? The abstract ideas. But material memory, it zooms right in on the objects and the spaces. Think of it this way. You can read a president's speech about a new law, and that tells you something. But seeing the simple, worn-out desk from their childhood home where they learned to write, well, that tells you something else entirely. One is about what was said, the other is about the physical reality that shaped who they became.
And believe it or not, there's actually a term for this stuff. The French historian Pierre Nora called them lieux de mémoire, which basically means sites of memory. These are the physical anchors we all use to connect to a shared past.
At the end of the day, this whole approach just lets us connect with history on a much more human, sensory level. It's like we get to access the lived-in, felt reality of the people who came before us, and it kind of closes the gap between their world and ours. All right, so let's get practical. How does this actually work? Let's start with the stories that objects tell. Because artifacts, they're not just passive props sitting around in someone's life story. No way. They are active players, holding the tangible proof of choices, habits, and little moments in time. And we can kind of group these storytelling objects into a few key categories. You've got your really personal items, you've got the objects that represent public power, and then there are the gifts, which tell us all about social connections. First up, personal belongings. I mean, just imagine an artist's paintbrushes, stained and worn down from years of work. They tell a story about dedication and maybe even struggle that you'd never get from a formal biography. Or a writer's favorite comfy chair. That tells you something about the thousands of hours they spent thinking and creating. These things give us a peek into the private, human side of a historical figure. And this quote just hits the nail on the head. These objects ground the abstract stories we read about, making them physical, making them real. It's like they give history a texture that you can almost feel. Now, on the flip side, you have objects of power. The pen used to sign a major treaty isn't just a pen, right? It becomes this powerful symbol of a moment that literally changed the world. These things are the concrete proof of a person's impact. And that's why seeing the actual object is so incredible. The philosopher Walter Benjamin called this its aura. It's this unique presence the original thing has, just knowing that this was the thing that was there. A picture of it is fine, but the real object, it has a kind of magic to it that a copy just can't touch. Okay, so we've talked about objects. Now let's zoom out a bit and look at the places where history actually happened. Because these environments, they aren't just backdrops. They're the stages, and in a way, they're the silent witnesses to a life unfolding. And just like with objects, we can think about these environments in a few different ways. You've got the intimate, private spaces like homes. You have the workplaces where all the action happened. And then there are the big public monuments, which are designed specifically to shape how we remember things. A workplace is so much more than just four walls. A scientist's lab or an artist's studio, those places are just buzzing with the energy of creation and discovery. Walking into a space like that gives you this tangible connection to the passion that drove a person's life's work. And different spaces tell totally different stories. Think about it. If you preserve a leader's small, modest childhood home, you're telling a story about humble beginnings. But you contrast that with a grand palace, well, that tells a story of power and status. They're both part of the same life, but the spaces highlight completely different parts of that person's journey. But here's what's really crucial to remember. These places are like palimpsests. You know those ancient manuscripts where they'd scrape off old writing to write something new?
but you could still see faint traces of what was there before. That's what a historic building is like. It's got layers upon layers of stories from different people and different times. And when you learn to read those layers, you get a much, much richer picture.
So reading history through objects and places sounds amazing, right? But it's not quite that simple. We have to be really careful, really critical when we interpret these material clues. Because the big question we have to ask is, can we actually trust what these objects are telling us? Is the story they present the whole story? Or is it even a true one?
You know, historians and curators, they face this big three-part challenge. First, there's selection bias. What stuff survives is often just a matter of pure luck or who had power, which means our historical record is always incomplete. Second, you have to check for authenticity. Is this thing even the real deal? And third, you have to interpret it. And that's the key. Curation is always storytelling. It's not just a random pile of facts.
And this is a really big one. Think about it. A king's fancy golden chalice gets preserved in a museum, but a peasant's wooden cup gets used until it breaks and turns to dust. This means the material record we have is heavily, heavily biased towards the rich and powerful. The everyday things of everyday people, their stories are so much harder to find, simply because their objects were never meant to last forever. And this brings us to maybe the most important things to remember here. When you walk through a museum, you're not just looking at a bunch of old stuff. You are walking through a story, a very carefully built story. The curator decides what to show you, what to put on the little card next to it, and what to leave out. Every single choice shapes the narrative. It's one interpretation, not the whole unvarnished truth. But even with all those challenges, connecting with the material past is just profound. These things are like an unspoken language from history. They let us feel this direct, almost gut-level link to the people who held them and used them and lived their lives surrounded by them. Which brings us right back to where we started. All the things you cherish, the spaces you live in, they are telling your story, right now, without saying a word. So I'll leave you with this final thought. Hundreds of years from now, what story will your things tell about you?